All right. Well, good afternoon or good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And as always, we're delighted to have Hank Phillippi Ryan with us. She's going to be talking about the brand new book, All This Could Be Yours, which is a big number one or USA Today bestseller. It's into a second printing, very exciting news. But let me give Hank a nice intro here. Uh, let's see. I've got a Yeah, okay. Hank Phillippi
You don't
Ryan is
have this memorized, Patrick? You just can't say this right off the top of your head?
I might need a little assistance with all
Okay,
the
okay.
details, but
And you've had a lot of hoopla over the weekend, so okay. Okay.
Patrick was up till 1 a.m. with me.
it's a pretty incredible CV. Hank Phillippi Ryan is the USA Today best-selling author of 16 psychological thrillers, winning the most prestigious awards in the genre, five Agathas, five Anthonys, and the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award. She's also the on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV and has won an unprecedented 37 Emmy Awards, as well as dozens more honors for her groundbreaking journalism and true crime stories. Um, Her work has changed lives, and resulted in millions of dollars in refunds and restitution for consumers. And if that's not enough, in her second career as a writer, national book critics call her a superb and gifted storyteller and a master of creating suspenseful mysteries. She's the past president of the National Sisters in Crime and is now on board of International Thriller Writers, on the board of. She lives in Massachusetts with her husband, a nationally renowned criminal defense and civil rights attorney. And her newest novel is Cross Country Cat Mouse Chase. All This Could Be Yours. Um, so, Hank, after all that, it's great to have you with us again.
Thank you. It's wonderful to see you all and wonderful to see you both. You know, this book started at Poison Pen. I mean, the idea came from the Poison Pen bookstore. And so this book would honestly not exist without you all.
I'm frightened to hear that because if there was a stalker in the audience that scared you into writing this book, wow. Okay, because the book is actually about an author on book tour who begins to sense that something's wrong with someone in the audience. She may have a stalker, and that stalker may have access to deeply held secrets. So, seriously, does somebody harass you at the
Oh,
store?
no, no, no. It's all good. It's all good. I mean, I have been, for the past couple of weeks, I've been an author on book tour talking about a book called All This Could Be Yours, which is about an author on book tour talking about a book called All This Could Be Yours. So
That's
nothing could be more meta and nothing could be more personal. But let me tell you that this is exactly what happened. I was at Poisoned Pen signing books, and I wrote in someone's book, so as everyone does, so wonderful to see you in Scottsdale. And I put my name and I put the date. And then I thought, wow, I've just given someone an alibi, right? Because it's that book is proof that I was there and they were there and the very date that it happened and absolute proof of an alibi. So I sort of thought, I thought, oh, ha ha, that's funny. And then I thought about all the other things because, we're a crime fiction author. And I think of all the worst possible things that could possibly happen. And I thought about all the other things that all authors write in novels, like, thank you so much for a wonderful evening. And it seems benign, but you hold up this book and it says, thank you so much for a wonderful evening. And then someone could say, you know what she meant by that. Here's what really happened. Or thank you for everything. And they could just concoct some potentially sinister story about the backstory of that seemingly benign signature. So it just got my mind going about book tour. And even though I love book tour, I embrace it. It's marvelous. It's glamorous from time to time. It's incredibly high stakes and incredibly high stress. And everybody you meet is a stranger. And everybody you meet knows more about you than you do about them. Right? I mean, think about the people who are here tonight. You all saw the Poison Pen's promotion about it and saw my promotion about it and read about it in the newsletter. And you might have checked my events and you might have checked my Instagram or Barbara's or the Poison Pen's Instagram. All that, we put that out there. we're saying, here, find me, come find me. But on the other hand, it's like, come find me, we're saying. You know where an author is at every turn. And I started thinking about, for this book, I started thinking about the built-in vulnerability of that, of the conflict between the desire for all of us to have everybody come to Poison Pen or to every other bookstore, or every other Zoom event, um, and the complexity, the potential sinister danger of having people know where you are. And the vulnerability not only to the author and the bookstore or the library, but to the people who are back home, to my husband who is back home or to my family who is back home. People might know where they are or what they're doing, and they certainly know I'm not there. And so what might be going on? So that was the dominoes of this book, which we can talk about the rest of the plot, but that's the domino that started it. So without you all, without that signing at Poison Pen, and I tell the story everywhere I go, without that signing at Poison Pen, this book would not exist. So
Well,
thank you.
it's really fascinating, and I'm so sorry that I keep coughing. But I remember years ago, and I don't remember what author it was, who came to the store and said the word was that we were the only bookstore that didn't have a resident stalker,
Oh,
that everybody felt safe coming to the store because many bookstores did have some eccentric fan, who would hang out. I mean, I remember one years ago at a Sue Grafton event, and he was so creepy. He just stood there and stared at her, but he didn't actually do anything. But you're right, you are dealing with strangers that you have invited into your life, into the store. I was thinking about that last night. I'm looking out at over 500 people, some of whom had weapons,
yep.
and I'm thinking to myself, what kind of security do we actually have here? Now, I relied on that author to be able to actually deal with that. But I often think that at the bookstore, what security do we really have
I
for
mean,
the
not to frighten everyone because, and we write crime fiction and we do crime
author?
fiction. And our complete brains are looking for the worst possible thing that could possibly happen and the worst possible situation that could possibly happen. And you, as proprietor of a store who's really, responsible for a group of people, and you invite people to come, you hope that people will come. Bookstores and libraries hope
Right.
people will come to the events. But we all know authors who travel with bodyguards. I was at an event yesterday, was it yesterday? Yes, in Atlanta with Elizabeth George. And there were people who were following us both around, and the bookstore owner had to sort of, and the organizer of the event had to sort of keep people away from us. Now, on one hand, that's, oh, you poor thing. On one
So
hand,
sorry. I
I'll
don't know why
keep
it's
I'll keep talking and you keep drinking tea. On one hand, that's completely wonderful. Who wouldn't want to have people want to talk with them? Who wouldn't want to have people want to talk about their books or get to know them? I mean, we put that out there. On the other hand, there's a line in this sort of parasocial behavior that people have where because you know that the ducks come to my backyard and you know that I can't make gravy on Thanksgiving. It's my sort of culinary bête noire. You know that because I put that out there. That's true and it's me and it's real. And I do that on purpose and I love that. And I embrace my readers and I embrace the people who love my books. That is the joy of my life. But all it takes is one. And for Tessa Calloway, the main character in All This Could Be Yours, she's a person just like so many of us. She's smart and she's good and she wants to do the right thing. She's a mom, she's a wife, she has a good job in the corporate world. And one day though, this is page one, it doesn't give anything away. One day she just decides that she has had it. She has had it with the corporate world. She's had it with being ignored. She's had it with feeling invisible. She's had it with it being the one who has the good ideas and then everybody else takes the credit and then she has to clean up their mistakes. She just had it with that. And on page one of All This Could Be Yours, live on Instagram, on her Hashtag moms with dreams. Tessa walks out. She quits her job and she says, I have one life and I'm going to live my one life to the fullest. I'm a mom with dreams, just like you all. I'm going to follow my dreams and write a novel. And what happens is, and this is chapter one, page one, it's a wild success. Her debut novel is a wild success. And Tessa, her dreams have come true, is sent on a glamorous nationwide book tour. Her publishers send her on a big, gorgeous book tour, where she's met with adoring fans, just like you had last night, with adoring fans and people who want her autograph and people who want to talk about her book and people who want to talk about her main character, Annabelle Brown. She's beloved. It's her dream come true until she realizes, as you said, that she might have a stalker or several, or at least someone who's trying to ruin her career and destroy the family that she's left back home. The problem is, and what makes it doubly terrifying to her, and what makes her not paranoid at all, is that she secretly knows it might be her fault. That some years ago, she made a Faustian bargain, what really felt like a deal with the devil. And she's worried that the devil has come to claim his due, that this is the time the bargain is got to be paid. And if she doesn't find out, who's trying to reveal her secret, her life and her career and her family will be ruined. So what starts out as a glamorous nationwide book tour turns into a deadly, dangerous cross-country cat and mouse chase with the author running for her life, just like real book tour, right? Just like real book tour.
Well, I don't think that's ever actually happened to
No,
you, has it?
no, no.
No, no. And you're right. I mean, what makes her vulnerable is that she has a secret.
Yeah.
Without that, it would be a whole different story.
Yes,
Um,
and I think that, that theme of guilt and remorse and high stakes and responsibility for her family, responsibility for the bookstores, responsibility for her publisher, responsibility for the library. I mean, the libraries. I mean, if she's the sole breadwinner of her family, her husband is fine, I'm sure, but he just can't keep a job. And when she got her book advance, he surprised her by buying a new house, a brand new, gorgeous, beautiful house. All this could be yours, he says, with a massive mortgage. So she's got to sell books to pay that mortgage. She's got to sell books to buy groceries for her kids. Luckily, her husband can stay home with them. But again, and I'm trying to protect your voice here by talking more than I ordinarily would,
thank
but
you.
she's she is trying to be a mom and a wife by Zoom and by FaceTime. And she begins to realize that her husband is curating the video the shots that he's showing her on the FaceTime and the Zoom. Why won't he show her the kids? Why won't he show her the kitchen? Why won't he show her their house? Why won't he show her the neighbors? And she can't come home to find out what's going on because her family's livelihood depends on her selling books. And so she's got, it's a story about responsibility. It's a story about how can you follow your dreams and can you really have it all? And what does that even mean? And it's a story about women in any realm of society who work, who love their job or who don't. But Tessa loves her job and embraces being an author and embraces being a famous author. But, somebody called my book a careful what you wish for thriller because that is exactly what happens in this book.
Fame is a really two-edged thing. It truly is. I mean, I thought about that as I've watched the careers of so many authors, many of whom did their first ever events at the Poison Pen when, there were like 4 or 5 people, me,
Yeah.
whatever, and then have morphed up into great successes. I'm always interested in how success illuminates character and um, and how people handle it and how their families handle it because it can be a corrupting thing as well as a liberating thing or and my experience is that the people who have the most trouble with it are the people who become so successful that they hire people to work for them. And what happens then is they begin to live in a bubble
Uh-huh.
because the people who work for them keep their jobs by protecting, that person. And I really admire a few authors I know who have managed, despite enormous success, to avoid that. And then I see others, who, and that's a survival strategy. How much of your life can you devote to the business of being an author? I don't know that readers understand today just how much business there is involved today in being an author. I remember when Frederick Forsyth was here, he was absolutely enraged. I mean, Putnam sent him here with the idea that we would have a very big audience, for Frederick Forsyth. It was a big deal. He did not want to do an event at the Arizona Biltmore. He resented signing books for anyone.
Really?
And his attitude was that his publisher, he wrote the book and he turned it in, and his publisher should then do all the work. And that was, in fact, true, Hank. That was how things
Some point.
worked.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so today, when an author is actually the entrepreneur of their own um, career in a way that wasn't true before, it does take an awful lot of time away from writing, time away from life to manage it all. You know that. I mean, your schedule is astonishing. Um, in fact, I remember saying to you not long ago that maybe you should spend more time with Jonathan.
Oh,
Yeah.
have you been talking to Jonathan? He mentions that from time to time.
Well, no, but I have heard that from Rob, which is why we're doing
Uh,
some traveling, which may be the reason I have this cold. But I thought about that. He's so patient when night after night I go to work and, and I think to myself, we're getting older and, is that really the best use of my time? So we all make choices. But anyway, let's talk about what you mean by a cat and mouse thriller because that seems to be kind of your passion when you write. You really love cat and mouse thrillers. What does that mean?
a cat and mouse thriller is a chase, it's a pursuit. And in my books, you're not really quite sure who's the cat and who's the mouse. But I think the key of a good thriller is that somebody wants something. And the question is, how far will they go to get that? But of course, there's not just one character in a book. There are several characters in a book who are pivotal to the action, and they all want something, and they all can't win. So a cat and mouse thriller is who's going to want the thing the most, or have the power the most, or figure out the most way that they can get what they want. And in my books, it's generally, well, it's always eventually the good guy. I think one of the things that's the DNA of my books that they're definitely cat and mouse thrillers, and either the cat or the mouse in the thriller is a main character who is a smart, savvy woman who gets the rug pulled out from under her somehow, who needs to regain her equilibrium, who needs to get her balance back, who needs to get her power back. And in a cat and mouse thriller, someone's trying to chase them to get that, take that power away. It also is so visual, isn't it? A cat and mouse thriller. All this could be yours. And I love this. All this could be yours is the most of the scenes which take place in contemporary times only take place in airports, airplanes, Ubers, hotels, bookstores, and libraries. It's just like being on a real book tour. And talk about a cat and mouse chase. Tessa's book tour is public knowledge. I mean, of course, she posts it. So Tessa is going to go from Indianapolis to Scottsdale to Tucson to Denver to Des Moines to San Diego. And it's all, the map of the cat and mouse chase is all laid out for the bad guys to follow. As someone says it, someone says as they're leaving her event in Denver, they say, "See you in San Diego." You know,
Right. No, I know. We
is
have
that,
seen we
you
have
know,
seen that with Outlander fans, for example. It's like a pilgrimage, where they go from one site
yeah.
to another. Generally, I mean, as far as I know, always benignly. But there is true fans do tend to follow a trail. But it's something I've noticed recently is that um, the pressure of publicizing book tours has brought that schedule public much earlier than it used to.
Yeah.
2 or 3 months rather than, and so it gives a bad actor more time to plan.
I mean, isn't that terrifying? If you look, I mean, and this is exactly what I did, and all this could be yours. I took everything that's lovely and wonderful about book tour and just weaponized the whole thing. I just made it
Yeah,
terrifying in every way. And if you look at it through one way, it's wonderful. It's fantastic. We have such a good time. I love seeing you. I love seeing the readers. I love going to events. I love even being, knock on wood, I love being on the airplanes. I love being in the hotels and, seeing who has slippers and who has bathrobes. On the other hand, we're always starving. We're always exhausted. You have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning every day to get on the plane to get to the next city. Honestly, most of the time on book tour, I'm not exaggerating. Most of the time, I have no idea where I am or what day it is. I mean, literally, I don't know. And I have to look at my schedule to say, okay, if it's Tuesday, it must be Des Moines kind of
right.
thing, which is hilarious and wonderful, but so disconcerting and puts you in such disequilibrium. And that's what I did to Tessa as well. She lives in Rockport, Massachusetts, which is, on the coast. And I took her to California first of all to get her in a different time zone from her family. So that everything, her metabolism, her day, her night is completely different from her husband and her two adorable kids' day and night, which makes the juggle even worse and the disequilibrium even worse, and the necessity for her to keep her head together even worse. And then when this bad stuff starts happening, what is she supposed to do? Because if she tells, she signed a contract with her publisher saying there's nothing wrong in her past, and if this comes out, as her agent, brusquely tells her, you'll lose everything. You're going to pay the money back and your career is over. And this is the end of it. And Tessa says, no, there's nothing. There's nothing, because she's hoping that this will not come out. So it's the stress is constant. And the thing about it though, what happened as I was writing this book, I don't have an outline. I don't know what's going to happen next. We can talk about that at some point if you want. But it's so super meta and super personal, this book. And I think only I could have written it. But it turned out to have this extra element, which just evolved and emerged, which I hadn't really planned, but it sort of turned out to be a love letter to bookstores, to independent bookstores, and a love letter to librarians and libraries. I'm in a couple of the scenes, a bookstore owner is the hero, or a librarian is the hero, and a love letter to readers and writers, and everyone in book world, because it made me really sort of plumb the reality of how our community works, of how we all depend on each other and rely on each other, and how, there's a scene where Tessa may have to cancel an event. I won't give any spoilers. And the bookstore owner says, okay, but okay. And Tessa's thinking, oh, they're going to have to send back the books. They're going to lose all that revenue from my event. They're going to disappoint the readers. All of the financial underpinnings of a bookstore's livelihood are at stake can be at stake with an author event. And I wanted to sort of open the window or door or whatever opening there is, aperture there is, see if to let readers understand how the book selling system works, and how what a tightrope it is for everybody involved in this, and how if one thing goes wrong, it just can topple the whole system. And this is my final thing, and how readers, the idea of readers talking to each other about books, sharing the books that they love, telling each other about the books that they love, how pivotal that is in all of our lives. And I burst into tears when I wrote the end of the book. When I came to the ending, I just burst into tears because I realized that this book is, a fast-paced cat and mouse chase. And it's surprising and twisty and propulsive. And I want you to miss your stop on the bus as a result of reading it and want to stay up a little bit later, a whole lot later. But it did turn out to be this emotional and personal look for me at this book world where we all exist.
Well, I think we could fairly say that you probably are um, the biggest, what do I want to say here? You do the most to make the system work. You are not just an author, but you're an incredible host and a promoter, and you put in an enormous amount of work behind the scenes as well as in public to make it all keep going. So you do have extra knowledge about how it works and how, the risks are. I mean, you're right that if one little thing goes wrong, it isn't so much the financial burden that the bookstore will accrue as the obligation to the readers that then becomes hard to meet. So, when we advertise things, as you pointed out, and you have people, I mean, we had people who came in from all over the country last night. How are we going to manage that if one little thing went wrong?
Sure.
If the author's flight didn't make it, if the rain, if the weather was terrible, if the books didn't, well, I knew the books were there. But if the
But
sound system
not
didn't
in,
work, if whatever it is, and so it's an enormously complicated jigsaw, and the larger in scope it is, the more responsibility you, the author, and the bookseller, and really the publisher has to make it all come together. Right? Patrick, you popped in, so what do you want to
I
talk
just
about?
popped in to give you a hand because I know, I know your voice is
I
shot.
know, it's just so
Um,
pitiful. I'm really sorry. It only happened at the last minute last night, so I didn't have a chance to reschedule Hank when I could back myself.
but I mean, it's such a fascinating topic to discuss. I mean, and I'm really fascinated because you talk to most authors, and almost without, exception, they've had a sketchy story or two, because when you're in the public eye, you know, I think that's just par for the course, right? I mean, but just about every author that I've ever encountered and have asked about that, have you ever had an uncomfortable encounter with a fan who tried to get, too close to you or, sort of, has that been your experience, Hank? I mean, have you
I mean, I
experienced?
think I think everybody has had an experience like that. Sometimes they're funny and sometimes they're sinister and sometimes you don't really quite know whether what the person really means. I mean, I've been an investigative reporter for 43 years. And all those Emmys on my shelf represent a secret that someone didn't want me to tell. And so all the, even though it was all for the greater good, even though I'm the good guy and it was for the greater good, there was someone who I harmed in every one of those, for every one of those Emmys. There's someone that I harmed, whose life I ruined or changed or altered, as a result of my story. So, I as a reporter, I've had the experience certainly of walking down the street and have a stranger say, "Oh, I love you, Hank. I love you," a stranger
Right.
also, thank you so much for all you've done. I've also had people scream at me and say, I hate you. You should die. You ruined my life. I can't, I've been threatened and stalked and followed home and sued and, pushed down and, everything that you could possibly emotionally and physically imagine. As a reporter, actually, my house was broken into once.
Wow.
And I came home from anchoring the news, and my house was surrounded by police cars. And my first thought, this is so funny. My first thought was, ooh, a news story. And then I thought, no, this is my house. This is not good. So I leaped out of the car and I said, I'm Hank Phillippi Ryan. And the police officer said, yeah, I know. And I said, this is my house. And he said, yeah, I know. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, a guy broke into your house. We caught him. A neighbor saw him. This was before there were Nest cameras and Ring cameras and all that. Broke into your house. A neighbor saw him, called the police. We came, we caught him. He's in the back of the cruiser. So I said, okay. And the police officer said, do you want to know why he broke into your house? And I said, yeah. And he said, because he knew you were anchoring the news live on TV and he knew you weren't home. I mean, as simple as that. That vulnerability, that exposure as a reporter or as an author, when I'm live at an event, I'm live at an event. We are there, as we said, surrounded by strangers. And you each have said this a million times in your life. Every time you say, when an author comes, every time you say, does anybody in the audience have any questions? Every author is thinking, and Tessa Calloway, and all this could be yours, is thinking, I hope they don't ask the question I don't want. I hope they don't ask the question that'll ruin my life. I hope they don't ask the question that I just don't want to hear. And you have no control over that. You have no control over what question is going to come from the audience and how you're going to dance and weave and try to answer that, especially if it's sinister or antagonistic or ugly. And of course that's happened. Of course that's happened.
Right. I mean, and they're the boundaries, as a bookseller, I'm sure Barbara would agree with this. I mean, it's anything involving reading, and it's a very personal and kind of intimate relationship. When you get to know a customer over years, and you're recommending books, you're connecting on that deep level, and it can mostly it's perfectly fine, but there have been a few uncomfortable episodes.
And that's the thing, mostly it's perfectly fine. But in a novel like All This Could Be Yours, where everything in crime fiction is just torqued up to 11, it's the worst it could possibly be at every moment, because that's what creates a page-turning thriller, that you care about the main character. And people love Tessa Calloway in the book, and they love Tessa Calloway when they're reading about Tessa Calloway because she's incredibly relatable. She's a mom with dreams. And so you root for her and you want her to be okay and you understand why she's doing what she's doing. On the other hand, it's really terrifying and really revelatory about the stress and the stakes and the fear and the exhaustion, and the lives that are at stake. In book world. The book is believable, and it could really happen. Many of the things in the book, not the scariest things, but many of the things in the book have certainly happened to me. The benign things like, and if they've happened to you too, when your hotel room key gets demagnetized and you have to slog back downstairs with your carry out food and get a new key, or you can't remember. This happened to me like Saturday. I went to the wrong floor and I couldn't remember my room number because your brain is just so addled by it. And so it's believable and relatable, and everybody who's been to a book event will never look at a book event the same way after reading this book. I promise you that.
And you're surrounded by people who you don't know, that are essentially strangers, but who know you. I'm just thinking about people hired by the publisher to get you from point A to point B. There's a lot of vulnerable little spots there. There are drivers, there are literary escorts. I was just thinking about, the airplane, since the security measures that are in effect now, this doesn't happen as much. But you remember before how someone would be holding up the Hank Phillippi
Sure.
Ryan sign at the airport to, your driver or whatever.
So
There's
this
some,
is this is a scene in the book. You're right on it, Patrick.
yeah.
And this is why, I was saying that I don't have an outline. And this is why it was one of the reasons it was so much fun to write this book on the days that it was fun to write this book, which was not every day, but most days it was really fun to write the book because it's what really happens. And I learned to look at an author's life on tour from a different point of view, through a different prism, as if, what if everything was terrifying? What could really be going on here? How many days on book tour? I'll just talk about myself personally. How many days on book tour did I get into a car with a stranger who I relied on to take me to the place that I wanted to go? I mean, if you start thinking about that, your brain will just explode. And yet every single author does it every single time, because the goal, this deep goal to talk to your readers and sell more books and have people read your books, is so overpowering and so overwhelming. Not to mention frankly, for the financial necessity, not only for the authors, but for the bookstores and for the publishers and for the whole publishing world. I mean, you could, as Tessa says one day, she says, I'm just a traveling salesperson, basically. That's what's happening here. But it's done out of love and it's done out of joy and it's done out of share storytelling. And one of the things that happens actually, and all this could be yours, is that Tessa draws on her understanding of storytelling to discover the motivation for why what's happening to her is happening. Goals and motivation and conflict and fear and guilt and remorse and revenge and love and all those kinds of emotions, that's what drive a story. And she learns from that about writing, um, how to solve her own problems. She solves her mystery through her knowledge of story. And that was really fun to write as well.
It was fun to write. I was rooting for one particular outcome, and I was happy that we got that particular outcome. Yep, and so you avoided any hint of cliche, I think, in how it worked. But let me ask you this, in part, this is a world of strangers to her because this is her first book and her first book tour. We have authors who are coming in at like their 20th
Uh-huh.
appearance at the bookstore. And by now, it's kind of like a family. The people who come, they recognize them. We have families that come, remember the two women, Patrick, they always want to sit at the little table with the blood and they
Yeah,
come early. And
yeah.
also, I mean, it's not as scary when there's that feeling of familiarity that comes. So I do think the fact that it was her first book, and also the stakes then are so high for her because it is her first book, um, really, make book more dramatic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so wise. I think, always a fish out of water story, a new kid comes to town kind of
Right.
story allows sort of, we'll talk about it just sort of clinically, allows the author to tell a story or show a story through the eyes of someone who is just learning about it. So it's a very different explanation to talk about book tour through the heart and mind and eyes and soul of a person for whom this has never happened before.
Exactly.
She doesn't know what's okay and she doesn't know what's typical. And in her case, she has the extra puzzle piece of knowing that she may be carrying her own problems. She may be bringing her own problem with her. A problem which I didn't know what was when I started writing the book.
Yeah.
I had a debut author on book tour, Faustian bargain. That's all I had. I typed the words chapter one, and I thought, okay, 99,000 words to go. Let's see what
Yeah,
happens.
you had to give her a secret. That conversation that we just had reminds me of why the Reacher series is so successful because everywhere he goes, it's his it's starting over. He's a stranger riding into town and no one knows him and he knows nobody. And I mean, there's a lot of comfort in reading a series where it's always in the same place with, repeat characters. I mean, there are a lot of readers who really enjoy that. It's a visit back to, wherever it might be, Kappa Cove, whatever. Kappa Cove's on my mind because Patrick is doing an event with Patricia Cornwell and Jamie Lee Curtis on Friday, and we're all going, why Jamie Lee Curtis? And by accident, I stumbled on the reason is that she's going to be starring in Scarpetta. And therefore, she's going to be doing this thing.
And Murder, She Wrote.
But that was what I was going to say. So I'm thinking, okay, Jamie Lee Curtis and Scarpetta. But then on Instagram came an announcement that Jamie Lee Curtis and George Clooney are going to revive Murder, She Wrote, the Angela Lansbury thing. And that depended entirely on people loving Cabot Cove and always wanting to go back there. So, you
Isn't
know,
that genius casting? That is genius. I mean, I just am in awe of whoever thought about that. But you're so right because there is an affection. I mean, that's one of the reasons that series works so well.
Right.
There is an affection for that adventure, for knowing sort of what the milieu is, and just knowing that there's going to be another fun story. I mean, that's the fun of a good story in a series like that. It and Lee Child, as you said so wisely, has conquered the problem of the repetitious feeling of a series. Because the problem is in writing a series, there is that comfort, but there's also the challenge for the author in that the mortality of the main character can't be at risk. Jack Reacher is not going to die. And the reader knows that from moment one. And so the idea, how good does a book have to be to keep us for 27 million, episodes of Murder, She Wrote or the Reacher books, knowing what the outcome is not going to be, that one of the choices is closed off for us. And that just shows such a skill and such a talent that the people who can continue a long series like that have. That's really,
But that I think that's the wonder of storytelling is that there are so many stories and so many story structures and so many audiences. And the trick, is for an author is really to find your audience. And I admire authors who break away and do something different. And take a risk of alienating their readers, and often do, but sometimes win new readers. And, I think it's fascinating to see the choices that authors make. It's also interesting to see the choices that readers make. Are they going to go along with it? Are they going to go, no, I only want Cabot Cove, so I'm not going to go wherever that is.
oh
Um,
yeah. I mean, I know series authors whose books take place in one certain location, and they think, "Oh, I'm so tired of writing about fill in the blank. I'm going to take my characters to, fill in a farther away blank." And readers say, "No, we want where we want. We want to be comfortable in this book." So you just have to, exactly as you all say, you just have to write a good story. It just has to be compelling and propulsive, and the reader has to care, and it has to make sense, and it has to be relatable, and the ending has to be satisfying and logical and surprising but inevitable. And that's the hard part too, is to have it be. I mean, thank you for your kudos about my ending. There's always, as I said, I don't have an outline. So there's always a time in the book, about, four-fifths of the way through, where I go into Jonathan and say, I don't think I know how to finish this. I don't know what's going to happen. And I would say, I think I've created a crime that I can't solve. Now what am I going to do? And Jonathan says, you always say that. And I say, yeah, I know, but this could be the time that I really can't do it. And Jonathan says, you always say that too. So, but when I found the end, when I figured out the end of All This Could Be Yours, I was by myself right here in this very study. And I stood up and I just applauded. I thought, yes, you got this. That's exactly what's supposed to happen. And that's I always think when you feel that way about the ending of a book, that means the author, and I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about in general in reading. When you put down the book and think, oh, yeah, that's exactly what should have happened. I never saw that coming, but that is so great. And that's what I'm searching for in an ending that.
Okay, but on the alternate, you can also say as the reader, this I'm hoping that what I think might be coming isn't actually coming. So it can go both directions.
Well,
And
you want to be unexpected but believable. You don't, I've read books where the twist is just so silly, or where on page two, I think, oh, well, I know you just know the whole book from page two, because we've all read a million books, and you've all read a million books. You know the ones that telegraph the ending. I went to an interview with Sally Field once, and she was saying that who played the going like this, she played the flying nun, and everything, and the Union movie, and what was that called, Norma Ray, and so many other things. And she said that she did not like to know the ending of the movies that she was in, because when she was playing the role as the movie was being shot, if she knew the ending, she would do what she called play to the ending. She couldn't help but foreshadow in her actions and in her voice and in her face and her, her physicality. She couldn't help but foreshadow what she knew was going to happen. So she would tell people, don't tell me what happens in the end. Let me just live this movie like real life. So it's a surprise at the end. And I think about that all the time. If you know the ending, I'm going to stick in stuff that makes it, that's going to shadow it when I don't even realize that that's what I'm doing. So I'm happy not to know. It's just a high wire act from time to time.
Every writer's creative process is different.
Yeah.
You know, you have to be comfortable with risk. You are comfortable with risk. And, I think that your many years of investigative reporting contribute to the kind of stories that you write and the way that you write. So it's always interesting to me that at nearly every event, and Patrick can say, somebody asks a question about process.
Yeah.
And what do you, Patrick, I often want to say to them, it's not transferable.
Yeah.
It's just not. I mean, it's interesting to hear them. I mean, what time do you get up? But none of it is transferable from the author to anyone in
Do you
the
think people
audience.
think it is transferable, or do you think
Yes, I
it's a
actually do.
secret thing? Oh,
Yeah, I do. Because it's for a reader without any real experience of storytelling. It feels like magic. And so, it's the deal about, going behind the curtain. You're gonna find the wizard, or you're gonna find the real Oz, whatever it is. But yeah, I do think to a great degree, they're hoping to see how the magic works.
yeah. And you can't. There is. I mean,
And you can't, yeah.
Sue Grafton used to call that the magic,
Right.
specifically the magic.
But the
That,
point is that it's different for every single author. So you can talk, there are commonalities. You can talk about story structure and character development and all the rest of it. But in the end, everybody writes their own process, and I often think that writers are in a way superstitious because what they wrote that will first work for them is what they stick to.
oh yeah, no question about that. I so agree with that. So my editor has said to me so many times, can't you just send me an outline? And I say, no, I can't send you an outline. I say, how do I know what happened until it happens? And it doesn't happen until I write the story. So just like life, I can't tell you in advance. And you're so wise, Barbara, about investigative reporting. When I've done my investigative stories, I don't know the ending of those
Yeah.
stories. If I knew them, it wouldn't be new. Everybody would already know the end. So I'm out in search of the story as an investigative reporter. I have an idea or a theory or a question or a bit of curiosity, and I follow that hypothesis and see what happens, whether it's true or not true, or what the reality is. So I'm out in search of a story. And I know I'm not going to know the end. I thrive on not knowing the end because that means it's new. So as a crime fiction writer, I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm going out in search of the story, and I'm not fearful, or it doesn't stop me that I don't know the end, because that not knowing the end means the book is going to be bigger and better and newer and more surprising. And so, but instead of investigating, documents and public records and doing interviews and going to various places, I'm investigating my imagination. I'm investigating my experience mixed with my imagination and coming up with something wholly new. So I've done that for 40 years, and I can't imagine creating a story any other way. I mean, let me put it this way: I can indeed imagine it, but I cannot do it.
Right. Fair enough. Patrick, anything you want to add, or do you want to look and see if there are
Yeah.
questions from the audience? I know that Hank is always driven crazy by the fact that she can't look at Facebook and YouTube and answer the questions herself. But you know what? We
Uh,
have never had a single security issue on Zoom because we don't let people into it. And,
I mean, it's
yeah.
frustrating to me because everybody knows that I love to talk to the
I know,
people who do
I
these things,
know.
and I love to react to them. And I'm so glad you said you made it clear that I don't know who's here,
Yeah.
and Hi, all of you, but
Oh, only Patrick actually knows who's watching this.
That's true.
It is true,
Um,
right? I don't know either.
I have a question for you, Hank. Has researching this book, kind of going into the weeds on stalking and all of that, has that inspired you to up your own security game? Have you made any changes to what you do out there on the road?
that's a great question. First of all, this research thing, I'm not sure I actually researched it as much as I felt it. I've lived a life of being fearful or wary or wise about being followed and stalked. And I understand parasocial behavior. I understand how the social media works and the problems of that, not only from being an author, but from, as Barbara and you both said, as being a television reporter for, on the air and in the public eye for 40 some years. So I know the feeling of it, and that is what I researched more than, I talked to several authors actually who do have bodyguards. But it's and they persevere. They knew that they just had to do it. Most of them have one particular person, as you said, Barbara, one particular person who seems to follow them around, and they're just really protecting people from that, and also from you know, the adulation of people who want to be their friends. Who just want to be with them and by them and near them and tell them their life stories and give them their books and give them gifts and those kinds of things that are wonderful uh, uh, emotions, but not efficient to deal with if you had to talk to every single person. Mary Higgins Clark once said that if you look at Mary Higgins Clark's signature on her books, it's perfect. Every signature she wrote is perfect, and she has said that if a person comes to a store or comes to her and wants an autograph, that it's out of respect to the readers that she's going to make a legible, readable name. That's her gift to the readers, is to not have it be a scrawl. And I always think about that. As I was saying, and I was just with Elizabeth George the other day. She totally, every single person who came to her to have her book signed, and I'm sitting next to her, is she totally focuses on them for their amount of time, and then the next person comes in. So authors have figured out how to do it, because I do too. I mean, I want to be embracing, I want to be respectful, I want you to know I am so glad that you are there. But as in answer to your question, Patrick, I'm really mindful, I'm looking around where people are and who's behind me and how many people are there and whether somebody's acting weird and whether, when I sign someone's book, do they actually leave? I mean, I was at an event recently where a person came and they were lovely and I signed a book for them, maybe two books for them. And uh, as the event was winding down and the line got shorter, got smaller and smaller as people started leaving, this person said, I'm just going to stay here till you are done. So I said, well, I'm good, I'm good. And then they said, well, I could drive you back to your hotel. And I said, oh, we're good. Thank you so much. That's so kind of you, but that's all taken care of. And they said, well, no, it's fine. I have a car here and I'll take you. I would love to take you. And at that point, the bookstore owner just came in and said, Hank's signing and she's going to be here for a long time. And we have a lot of stock for her to sign. And she's not going to be leaving anytime soon. And we're going to be closing up. And thank you. And I'm sure you both have done that in your store too, that, it's like the time is up. So I'm really aware of it. Patrick, I also make sure that I have shoes ready in case there's a fire alarm, as you read in the book, in case there's a fire alarm. I always take a picture. Now, Reese Bowen taught me this. I take a picture of my hotel room number as when I arrive at the room, so I don't forget what room number I'm in. That little travel tip from Reese. And I never check a bag. Even on my 2-week book tour, I only had a carry-on, which does not have my name on it. It has something else on it so that nobody can know whose suitcase that is, as Tessa Calloway learns all too horribly in All This Could Be Yours. I've had authors, this is my final thing. I've had author friends say to me that they're so glad they read this book when they got home from book tour, because otherwise they just would have been creeped out if they had read it on the road.
Right,
But
sure.
those are really very good tips, not just for authors, but good tips for traveling in general.
Oh
Yeah,
no,
I always wonder with social media and everything, as you say, people are just voluntarily giving up so much information about themselves. All these pictures of themselves on vacation. Well, that means we're not at home. Come rob us,
100%. I mean,
Um,
once I put on social media, I put on Instagram or something. Here I am at gate D42 at the pick a place airport, and my publicist texted me and she said, "What are you doing? Putting that?" And it just never crossed my mind. I was just so enthusiastic about where I was going and what I was doing that I forgot that I was giving up a massive amount of privacy. And that's the bottom line of what we're doing with much joy. I mean, I say this with no element of complaining. I'm the luckiest, happiest, most lucky person in the world. But and I love this, but there is an element of, I mean, it's kind of a good problem, but it can be a problem.
everybody has to be mindful of it,
Yeah, yeah.
Um, let's see. So there's a question that says, has there ever been a time in your career when you felt tired of writing, or is it something that always encourages you to move forward?
Tired of writing? No, I mean, that's a great question. I've never been asked if I was no, if I'm tired of it. No, I embrace it. I adore it. I love every bit about it. The thing that is wearisome from time to time is, and this sounds so silly, but I always worry that I'll never have another good idea. That, when I start writing a book, I think, I don't know how to do this. And I don't know how I did the ones before. And I don't know what those are because I couldn't have possibly done that because I don't know how to do it. And so there's sort of a ramping up of getting your writer brain back. But the more I write, the more excited I get. I mean, I can't wait to get to my computer every day to write. I love it. And part of it is, I can't wait to find out what happens next in my books. And the only way I can find that out is to sit here and see what happens. So no, it's very exciting. It's very exciting to me. Do I get tired in general? Sure, sure. Get up at 4 a.m., to get a plane. And you wake up at like 11 and 12 and 1 and 2 and 3 to find out if it's 4 o'clock yet. So there's an element of actual tiredness, physical tiredness, but tired of writing, no, no, no. And I don't think I ever will.
Have you ever written yourself, I'm sure you have, written yourself into a corner that you've had to back out of and
I love writing myself into a corner. That is my favorite thing. That is always a gift because it means I have to think of something. And when you think there's no way out of this, of course there's a way out of it. I mean, there's a wonderful Thomas Edison quote. I hope let me get this right, which is when you think you have exhausted all of the possibilities, remember this, you haven't. And that, it's not that there's no answer. It's not that you've written yourself into a corner. It's just that you haven't figured out what would really happen and what someone would really do. Now, and that's not to say I don't mean to go on about this, but when you figure out what should happen or what does happen, sometimes you have to go back and fix what happened earlier and earlier than that and earlier than that because it's all a chain and it's all, writing a good story is all causation. That's the key of everything. Something happens because of something, and because of that, something else happens, and because of that, something else happens, and because, and that makes sense. So sometimes the domino doesn't hit the next domino. Why doesn't the domino hit the next domino and keep it tipping over? If to go into this ridiculous and ununderstandable metaphor, but you know what I mean, that the dominoes have to topple all the way through and they have to touch each other and in order to make the next one fall. That's causation. That's how a book works. And so that decision making process along the way is what makes the story propelled forward. And when I write myself into a corner, which I love, I just think, what would somebody really do now? What would someone really do now and why? And then the answer eventually emerges.
right. You notice how, in some thriller mysteries, they'll take the trouble early on of like telling you the gardener's name. this very minor character.
Yeah.
You go, huh, that's interesting. I wonder why they did that, and then
No,
they'll show
see,
at the very end.
this is what ruins reading for people like us and all of you who are in the audience as well. I watch TV with my husband. We're watching some crime show or something, and I'll say, after about 2 minutes, oh, it's the sister. She's
Yeah.
pregnant. Someone's going to drown. He did it. I like him for it. And my husband says, can't you just watch it? And I say, no, I can't just watch it. I have to figure it out. And for us as authors, I know you're doing that. I know you're going to notice the gardener's name. And so would I not say the gardener's name, or would I put his name in a list, or hers in a list of a whole bunch of other people's names? So you
Right.
saying, I know you're going to think one of these is it, but you don't know which one. And so as an author, I don't mean to say we, but as an author, I'm aware of the sleight of hand that authors have to do. And I know that you are aware of it as well. So I have to go 2 steps ahead of that. And that's my goal.
There's
Yeah, I
something
have
about it
to
when you
stick
get,
in.
go
Sorry,
ahead.
I'm going to stick in a comment, which I find I drive Rob crazy too. But do you know what I find to be the biggest clue when I'm watching crime shows on television? It's the casting. If there is a major actor who has a role that looks totally innocent, you know it isn't, right? Because
Yeah,
they're not accepting a bit part in
yeah,
this production.
yeah,
And it
exactly.
really irritates Rob sometimes when I say, oh, it's the uncle at the winery. And he goes, but I say, but he's like the third star in this thing and he's
Exactly.
not there.
Yeah, I love that. And we know that. And I think it's sort of a wink and a nod as well. I think that the writers know that we know, and that's fun. I mean, like when I was growing up and watching Perry Mason with my stepfather, it was always the third person or something like that. Not the most unlikely person, but like the second most unlikely person is who it was. It really makes you think about how Hamilton Berger and the prosecution, they just rarely got it right. I mean, that's nobody ever talked about that. Or like in Law and Order, right? Don't they get the guy?
Right.
How did they make
How,
that?
how, how did Hamilton Berger ever keep his job is the real mystery of
Exactly.
the Perry Mason cases, right? Too funny. Are there any other questions from the audience, Patrick?
I'm just looking. Not too much. Oh, Renee asks, Hank, do you check into hotels under different names?
No, you have to use your legal name, right? Because it's what's on your credit card. And so you can't really be incognito. So that would be a good idea, and that would be a cool thing to try, Renee. And I'm so glad you're here. But it would be like legally hard, administratively hard to do, unless you.
Unless you're writing under a pseudonym, which some authors are.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean,
somebody wrote, was Stephen King's Misery an influence on your book at all?
in
Or
a kind of back-endy kind of way. I didn't go into it about misery, but it's irresistible to think about that a fan would cause a writer a problem. And I can't really say anything more about that until you read the book. But as Barbara so wonderfully said, it's not what you think it is. So that's why I can't talk about misery anymore, because if I say it is or it isn't, then you'll know. So
right.
when you read it, let me know what you think. But the idea of but the idea of fans, I mean, why do you think it's from fanatic, and the people who are fanatic about it can be a problem, and that's certainly what Stephen King was going for, demanding someone write the book the way that they want to write have the book be, or else,
Mm.
or whatever on whatever element of the reader spectrum that is. Stephen King, the king understands the pressure and the affection and the passion that readers have for stories that can be transferred to the writers. And that's the problem.
Well, that's about it as far as
Wonderful.
questions.
Well, thank you, Hank. And I apologize to everyone watching this for, I
Barbara is human.
know, I'm really sorry. I just happened
No, you're such a stalwart to persevere through
Yeah.
this. When you could
I
have
know,
told
but
me,
I don't like not being fully up to, the event any more than you do. So I'm annoyed, but here I am. Anyway, it's always a joy to talk to Hank. She has so many interesting things to say. And let me point out that although the book has been reprinted and all, we still have some autographed copies of the original printing
yeah,
here at the store. So you still have a chance to order one. And I think anyone who regularly comes to book events or, likes to follow an author's path or whatever, really should read this book because there are so many layers and questions that the book raises that you may never have thought of. So, it's great recommended reading from that time. I'm sure you had a wonderful time writing it. I thought of that the whole time I read it was what a good time Hank had writing this.
you're completely true. I loved writing this book. It's a completely different experience from any other book I've ever written. And
Right.
it came out to be, it's still a Hank book. It has the Hank DNA. It was a completely different experience that I've ever had. And yeah, yes, Barbara, you all do have like the last of the first editions. So
And
definitely.
only a few. But Hank was kind enough to sign them since we had set this up as a Zoom event. So she was a real sport and went to the trouble. It's not all that easy for an author to get boxes of books at home. I mean, they have to open them, they have to unpack them, they have to sign them, they have to repack. It's a pain. So we're really grateful to Hank for
I'll
doing
tell you
it.
what, Barbara, the only thing worse than that is not having somebody send you books to sign.
Well, that might be, but nevertheless, I
I,
always wish that we had, some kind of a book robot that we could send along to help out because it really is a lot of work and we very much appreciate it. So, anyway, thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon or this evening if you're in the East Coast. And come and get a copy of All This Could Be Yours. Bye, Hank. Enjoy the rest of the fun
Take
for this.
care.
take care, drink tea, take care of your cute little throat. Patrick, thank you. You all thank, I'll come see you in person.